Welcome, Jim, to the 23rd episode of Unleash the Knowledge's podcast, Everyday Extraordinary, where it's my job to push the message that we all have extraordinary capabilities within us that simply need to be channeled and activated. And I do this by having amazing conversations with everyday extraordinary people like yourself. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Morning, Owen.
Awesome. Well, Jim, you are the new author of The Innovation Stack, a book that came out during COVID, and we'll talk about that a bit, but I'd love to share the subtitle. It's Building an Unbeatable Business, One Crazy Idea at a Time. And you have quite the resume that we'll tap into in a bit as well, but I just want to note that the cover is amazing. I'm sure we'll give some kudos to your publisher, or this could be completely your creative ability as you are.
It was not mine. It was not mine.
Well, it's very attractive and it definitely catches the eye. And the last piece I do want to say is the humor throughout the book is amazing, especially in the footnotes. I wanted to put it out there that the one that really got me, which I'm not sure why it was the one that got me really laughing, was when you put an exponent in the book and then you drop a footnote and you're like, not a footnote.
That's a math joke.
Right. It was too funny. It was like, not a footnote. This is actually an exponent. Keep reading. And I was like, wow, he got me there.
Yeah. I had a lot of fun with it because, the book was originally a graphic novel.
Right.
Like I wrote the whole thing as a cartoon. And unfortunately, Herb Kelleher, who was one of the guys that I was writing the book for, hated the idea of the graphic novel format. So I actually rewrote the book, but I saved a lot of the humor. So that was the sort of concession to actually making it a printed book.
Nice. Yeah, and I love that you did still include at least that one chapter or the story of Giannini, I believe.
Yes.
Botching his name, but that's that piece was awesome. Super well done. Glad that that's accessible to all readers through your website. And
yeah, so it's free and everyone should get it if they want to, and it preserves the graphic novel.
Absolutely. All right, so let's hop into some questions. I'll start my timer and we will be able to provide some fun value. So first question I'd like to ask all my guests is for you to describe yourself in your own words. Who is Jim McKelvey?
I'm a normal guy who's gotten extraordinarily lucky by sort of stumbling onto some really powerful tools. So I grew up St. Louis, Missouri, nothing particularly special. I studied computer engineering, studied economics, became a glass blower as a profession, and have started a bunch of businesses. But I sort of stumbled onto this formula that has been super successful, and I didn't actually realize what I was doing until Square. So Square was sort of the big thing. But even before that, I'd seen the pattern several times in my life, and I just didn't recognize it. So fairly normal guy, not dressed particularly well, don't live in a fancy house. Actually, I'll tell you, Norma, one of my friends just gave me a Christmas present that he bought with his food stamps.
Wow.
Okay. So this is my Christmas present. It's a bottle of V8. And is one of my buddies. I've known him for 30 years, and he's on food stamps. So that's his Christmas present. So maybe that tells you something.
Yeah, that's incredible. Obviously Square is where most people know you by. Right before the second question I'll hop into, I just want to say my buddy just started his own barbershop. He uses Square, and he wanted me to send his thanks to you. He says that Squire, I believe, is a competitor. They stink, and he's happy that he's used, or actually it might be Clover. One of those.
Clover, yeah. I've never heard of Squire. It could be Clover. Yeah, Clover's bad.
So I just wanted to send that over to you before we keep going.
Good.
So the new book is out. You published it during COVID. I'd love to hear a little bit about two pieces for this. One, how has that process been during COVID, getting the book out? And two, someone just comes across the book on my page, your page, in Barnes & Noble. What's the number one takeaway you're hoping readers can gain after reading the book?
Yeah. So first question, publishing during COVID was a complete disaster. And this is funny because I had this, pretty high-end publishing team out in New York, and we had the book done, middle of last year. And we picked March 10th as the perfect date to release a book based on everything else. And it turned out to be the worst day in a century. That was literally that everything was shutting down. So all the PR we had, if we'd been a week later, it would have been better. If we'd been a week earlier, it would have been better. Like, we picked literally the lowest part of the curve. So, maybe you should take with a grain of salt what I say in the chapter on timing. But, as far as the thing that I think I wanted people to take away was just this recognition that there is a different set of rules that apply when you're doing something that is entrepreneurial and when you're doing sort of normal business. And most of our time, throughout our lives is going to be spent doing stuff that we know how to do or that others know how to do. So in other words, you might not know how to do it, but you can find someone who does, or you can, YouTube a video and figure it out. You spend almost all your life living in this world where if you don't know the solution, you can copy it from somebody who does. Mm-hmm. There is this tiny sliver of human activity where the solution is unknown to anybody. And therefore, if you're going to find the solution, you're going to have to do things that are really uncomfortable and weird for you. They will feel abnormal. And so I've spent a little bit of time on the other side of that line, not much, but it's what built Square. It's what built Launch Code. It's what built, the Third Degree. I'm applying the same tools right now for another company. And it's very awkward to work in that world, but I wanted people to recognize it because so often I think people, when they start feeling uncomfortable, quit. And they quit not because, they don't have, perseverance or character. They quit because they've been taught to quit. Your whole life, you've been taught to become qualified before you do something. I mean, I fly planes. It's my hobby. And like, you're an idiot if you get into an airplane without proper training. Like, you're an idiot if you don't, I'm like on my desk, I literally have study materials for air stuff. And I've been flying for 12 years, so this is a thing where you should be qualified. But the first time in human history somebody does anything, that person will by definition not be qualified. And so I wrote a book so that if you ever in your life encounter a situation where you want to solve a problem and humanity hasn't gotten there first, you will at least recognize the situation. You might not do it. You might not, you might quit, but at least you'll know what's going on, because I think too many people quit because it's just uncomfortable and unexpected. So it'll still be uncomfortable, but after you read my book, it will not be unexpected.
Absolutely. And you say towards the end of the book, I think it's one of the last pages, but you say, I hope after reading this book, you either look at a problem and say, I'm not going to do this, I'm not even going to take it on, or I'm going to solve this problem. It's not a limited belief, oh, I don't have this resource, oh, I can't, I'm not strong enough, whatever that may be. And you definitely gain exactly what you said through the book. It's one piece I do want to note is my generation, the millennials, the generation Z, entrepreneurship is being thrown around left and right. It's starting an online business, running around in, Bali and living that laptop lifestyle. But you say clearly that the word entrepreneur or entrepreneurship as a whole is doing that 0 to 1, taking something brand new and building it out. So I think that's a message that really needs to be pushed out far more, because
And Owen, I want to emphasize, I'm not criticizing people who copy. Mm-hmm. I copy almost everything I do in my life. Like, almost everything I do. I mean, everything in this room is a copy, including me. Like, everything that works in my life, with the exception of this tiny, tiny sliver, has been perfected by others. So if you want to do the 4-hour work week and, copy what's other people have done successfully, go do it. Sit on the beach and do that. And you can call yourself whatever you want. The problem I had because I had to write this book, was that when I started to write, I realized for the first time in my life, like this was like a page one realization. I start to write the book, and I was like, okay, I need a word to describe a business person who isn't copying everything. And I was like, shit, we don't have a word for that. Like we literally don't have a word for it in English. And so I started, because my vocabulary isn't all that good, and there's some words I don't know. So I started looking, and I stumbled across the fact that the word entrepreneur originally meant that. And I was like, oh, okay, that explains a lot, because like 100 years ago, this economist needed to describe some of the phenomena that I discuss. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, he needed a word, and we didn't have a word back then. So he took the word entrepreneur, which was sort of this French derivation. And he said, okay, this word means a business person, but sort of a crazy business person who's likely to end up dead, and probably you wouldn't let your daughter date this person, but you would say that they're, at the very least, they're being original. Mm-hmm. So that's how we got the word. But then over the last century, the word's been sort of co-opted, like a lot of words do. They could just get overused, and then the precise definition fails. So yeah, if you're an entrepreneur, by my definition, you're a weirdo.
Absolutely, yeah. You're probably heading towards the 12-day seminar as well, which another piece up about.
Oh yeah, it was funny because one of my business partners, I got two. Actually, I shouldn't tell you. I have several business partners who are recovering alcoholics, and they're awesome people. Like these guys kick ass, and they're not shy about their addictions. But they read the book and they were like, oh yeah. And the line in the book, you haven't read this thing probably if you're watching this podcast. I basically claim that there are more entrepreneurs in 12-step programs than in business school, right? Because in business school, you're learning formulas. You're learning like do this, and they may call the course entrepreneurship, but that's a load of crap. Like, because you can't teach the stuff that hasn't been done.
Right.
There's just no way to teach this stuff.
Absolutely. So let's talk a bit. You mentioned timing before, and I actually have a question about timing. So you share about the concept of negative float, and that how Square was, one of the revolutionary ideas of Square was it was the fastest settlement process opposed to the slow, arduous credit card companies at that time. And you say this because the interest rates were near zero during this 5 or 6 year gap between 2009 and 2015. Do you believe that Square was built at this perfect time? Do you think it would have worked 5 years prior, 5 years afterwards? What can you talk about in timing in that regard?
I don't think Square would have worked 5 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Because we needed the iPhone.
Yeah, true.
Prior to the iPhone, and we tried to make Square work on Blackberries. I don't know if you remember Blackberries, but they were sort of this computer, and they had this crappy OS and this crappy ASIC chip, and they had like this. The BlackBerry was this sort of well-marketed technical piece of crap, and we could not get our stuff to work over the BlackBerry hardware, let alone with the BlackBerry company. Like the BlackBerry company had just toxic levels of mismanagement. So if Square had launched without the iPhone, I think we would have been too early and would have died.
Got it.
Now, 5 years later, I don't know. Like, would somebody else have done what we did? Probably not, but maybe. Who knows? At some point, somebody would have come up with a solution. And there actually were probably other people that had the same ideas. We ran into a few of them. Like we were not the original people, or I shouldn't say, we were not the only people to try to connect the microphone to, the card reader to the microphone jack. It turns out there were two companies that did that. Mm-hmm. One was Square, and the other one was a company called Transactions Inc. And we actually ended up buying Transactions Inc. just so that the patent work would be clear.
Right.
I bought him Christmas. Actually, this is the 10-year anniversary of me buying Transactions Inc. because it was like a week before Christmas, and this guy needed cash, and I bought the whole company for $2,000.
That's amazing. Wow. That's a good buy. Pretty cheap too.
They didn't have any tech that we needed, but it made the patent thing clearer.
Right. And you take them out of the space.
Yeah.
So do you have any advice or tips towards, a 22-year-old coming out of college that you might have wished you knew back then? And I'd ask this question maybe pre-COVID, maybe more of a general advice piece for, something you've gained towards the end, this current lifestyle that you've lived so far, what you wish you knew.
Well, so yes. And I don't want to repeat myself because I think that's boring for your listeners, but the recognition of where the line is between when you need to copy and when you have to innovate. So I'll tell you a story. I was sitting in the living room of a very successful man who was pre-reading. He was one of my reviewers for the book. And he read the book and he said to me, if I'd had this book 20 years ago, I wouldn't have quit one of my companies. Now, okay, so I need you to picture this guy's living room. In his living room is a painting. And I know a little bit about art. This single painting is worth more than everything I own. Like if you take my airplane, my houses, my cars, all my clothes, all my wife's jewelry, take everything and pile it up and sell it at full retail. It is not even close to the value of this one painting. Wow. All right, that this dude had just hanging in his living room, but like 50 other paintings. But like, I looked at this one, I was like, holy, I was like, one of those things. So this is a very successful guy. And he said to me, he's like, if I recognized the innovation stack, if I'd seen that we were on this path, I wouldn't have quit. And I said to him, I said, yeah, look, I wish I had known this when I was younger, because I didn't necessarily give up, but I suffered so much extra grief because all the stuff that I was doing, which would eventually work, wasn't working at the time. And I felt like the biggest idiot. And I'd go to my friends who all had successful companies and I'd copy what they were doing and I'd apply it to my situation and it would blow up in my face. And I was like, why does it work for them and it doesn't work for me? And of course the answer, well, it's me. Like, I'm incapable of doing this stuff. Turns out it wasn't necessarily me, right? It turns out that if you're an entrepreneur, if you're doing things that have never been done before, a lot of the rules change, like the way you price a product, the way you market a product, the way you handle customers, the way, like, it's all these things that we're taught, and probably in business school, the rules reverse. And boy, recognizing that is really helpful. These days, like I got one company, we're doing all this weird stuff. And, I know the rules are backwards. I'm like, okay. Like normally you should do this. Here's why we're not going to. And we're going hard left. And I explained it to him because I've got data now. I can sit there and say, look, worked for IKEA, worked for Birdseye, worked for Tesla, worked for Square. I got 50 companies that I can throw up and I can say, look, here's the evidence why your rule doesn't apply in this specific case. I think that's important to know.
Absolutely. And you obviously shed light that now you think in a certain way. You see these perfect problems. You can see innovation stacks, because of this mindset or this ability of teaching yourself how to do so. Do you just on a daily basis come up with revolutionary ideas, or are you seeing ideas just that could be disruptive left and right? But you don't have the time or energy?
No, it's not that. On a daily basis, I'm kind of boring. Like I got to teach my son how to cram for an exam today.
Okay.
Like he's got to take a standardized test. The kid's freaked out. And I'm like, no, you can cram for this. It's really terrible. But that's my afternoon. I'm teaching a 10-year-old how to study for a test that he doesn't want to take. This afternoon, I'm making some Christmas presents for some friends. I'm delivering some other stuff. I got to go to a Fed meeting. That's boring, right? I don't expect to be in a situation today where there's much innovation, but occasionally it happens, right? So occasionally I will run across a problem and I'll say, why didn't anyone solve this? Like, why don't we, I'll give you a problem I'm working on right now. I want a 5-cent diaper. So diapers, if you don't know, cost about 25 cents.
Okay.
And if you're poor, they cost more actually, because the poor people can't buy them in bulk, and they buy them in stores that have much higher markups. So like if you're poor, the start of diapers is like the start of poverty. You know, because it's okay to sort of be a single person and you don't have much money. Yeah, you can couch surf, you can do a bunch of stuff.
Right.
Like I do have one friend who's kind of borderline homeless, but like most of the time, if you're by yourself and you're poor, it's okay. If you're trying to take care of a kid and you're poor, life gets really rough. And if you're single by yourself and trying to take care of a kid, it's really difficult. And I think the world needs a cheap diaper, like a really cheap diaper. And like, why the heck can't we make an affordable diaper? And I've been just chewing through diaper literature. Like that's what I do. And it turns out that if the world's going to come up with a new diaper, there's going to be an innovation stack behind it. There's going to be this thing, because like the current diaper technology sort of tops out at 16 cents. Like you just can't seem to get super absorbent polymers and all the stuff that they do below that. So this is a problem. I'm like, okay, if I actually wanted to do this, I would have to reinvent the way, poo is trapped.
That's interesting though. I mean, there's obviously a need for that. 100%.
It would change lives. It would stop a cycle of poverty. Like if you could, a third of the US population has trouble paying for diapers. 1/3, 1 out of 3 families.
That's incredible.
I mean,
yeah, a need is there. Wow. So 2 last quick questions I have.
yeah.
You clearly, you talk a bit about mentors, but, reading a lot about people that have already passed, so you could gain a lot of knowledge and see the patterns that they've, implemented, so that could potentially be implemented today. Are there any books or a few books that you find yourself rereading, or that you always gift out to others, maybe aspiring entrepreneurs that could definitely use the knowledge?
So I got to read a copy of Good to Great, which I see in your red pile.
Yep. Right.
Yeah, right there. The Good to Great. So I ran into Jim Collins at a conference. We were both speaking. This was when he was writing the book. So he gave me he gave me what they call a draft copy. These are galleys, typos and stuff. He gave me one of those of Good to Great, and I still have it. It's one of my more cherished possessions. And that's an excellent book. For 2 reasons. One, Collins does a statistically rigorous analysis, which I hate these business books that are just opinion. Like, get some data. I don't care if you're a billionaire. Get some data. Just because you were lucky doesn't mean you can ignore math, right? So get some data. Collins gets data. So I like that about it. I hate most business books. I don't read them. I'm sort of embarrassed to add one to the pile, except that I think if you read mine, you will recognize that it's kind of abnormal. But, that's a good one.
Sure.
The other one that I liked, and this goes back 40 years, The E-Myth by Gerber, which is basically this idea that when you become an entrepreneur because you've got a specific skill, all the other problems with business get in the way of you doing that specific skill. So let's say you're a good plumber and I'm really good at plumbing. And you say, I'm going to open a plumbing company. Well, guess what? Now you're a manager. Now you have to repair trucks. Now you got to order supplies and handle accounting and do invoicing and make sales. And all of a sudden you don't have any time to be a great plumber, So that's something that I thought was really good. Look, I'm not saying, sort of ignore the business press, but I'm saying this. Most of the books that are written and popular are, they're a little suspect to me because they are written by people who haven't done it. And my question is, if you've got this magic formula, why don't you go out to the world and use it?
Right.
And then you got the people who've done it, but with very rare exception, I find that most of those books are just like totally unscientific. They don't actually, they're ghost written and they don't have the data, you know?
Yeah.
So I didn't want to, that's why I didn't want to write a business book. I wrote a graphic novel. Like I was so psyched to not write a business book, but then, Herb Kelleher, I think very wisely said, if I do a graphic novel, it perpetuates the hero story. It perpetuates the idea that entrepreneurs are somehow better than the rest of us. They're somehow these superhuman people, because that's what superhumans, that's how you character, like a superhuman fits in a graphic novel. Like a normal person doesn't get pen and ink, they get type. So Herb was right, although it was really disappointing because I had to throw away a year of work. Yeah.
Oh man. Well, that's some good recommendations. And you do bring up a point that I've come across through my, many books of personal development and business. There's a lot of just random coaches out in the world, and none of them have actually done much. And then there's a lot of repetitive work. Like, I mean, we talk about copying, but it's almost verbatim in some of these books of people just regurgitating the same information. I always think, like, I said this the other day to someone who's done very well. And I was like, I think there's people out there that are successful because they are just these coaches. They're successful being coaches.
Yeah.
It's so bizarre. Like, usually I would think I come from a basketball background. So I just spent 6 seasons in Division I basketball, and the best coaches are more times than not former players. And they can understand the game. They went through the process. So you would think that, like yourself, someone who's been very successful, you would then go on and be a coach of some sort, or a mentor to others because you've been through it.
I've been asked to mentor a lot. The problem I have with that is smart people know that the way to get money out of somebody is to ask them for advice and then ask them for money. So a lot of people come up to me and they pretend like they want advice when they really want money. Mm. And as a result, I become really skeptical. Like, this guy called me last week, and it was one of these calls I had to take kind of out of politeness, because I think I know his father. I know his father. I think I know his father. His kid comes to me. So I got to kind of be nice to this kid. And he played the game. He's not stupid. He was like, well, I'd really like your advice. And I was like, yeah. Where's the pitch deck? And sure enough, there was the pitch deck. And I was like, okay, I get it. So, look, I don't think I've got better advice to give than the 300 pages I wrote, because I rewrote that book 8 times. And I wrote it for a very specific person. I dedicated that book to a person who I know, who's incredibly talented, has an MBA from one of the best universities in the world. Not an MBA, I'm sorry, master's degree. But I mean, super credentials, super hardworking, just a very, very competent person. And yet I've watched her a couple times in her life come up against problems that she cares about, but she doesn't feel qualified to solve, and she stops. Okay, now this is one of the most qualified people on the planet. Okay, there are not too many people walking around alive today who have better credentials than this person that I know. And when she comes across a new problem, she quits. She stops, and she stops for a very good reason, because she says, Jim, I'm not qualified to do this. And my point, which is, 300 pages of text now, is, of course you're not qualified. Like, nobody's qualified to do something the first time. The Wright brothers were not qualified pilots. They couldn't be. We didn't have airplanes. They couldn't get trained. They didn't have simulators. They didn't have, ground school or anything. It was kind of like they flipped a coin. Well, the poor bastards had to get in, turn the engines on, and see if he was going to die. Like, that's how you do it the first time. And unfortunately, that's always how you do it the first time. And so, my book it's just a cry, because, like, I don't want the talent of the world sitting on the sidelines. Like, I don't want my friend, the next time she comes against a problem, to sit there and say, I can't do it because I'm not qualified. I want her to say, I'm not qualified, which means that I'm going to do it. I got this other path that's going to be different and rough, but is still doable.
Right. That's awesome wisdom. And and we talk a little bit about persistence, but there's an aspect to it that you just got to go for it. You can maybe have all the credentials, you could have all the academic background, you can be the picture perfect person, but you're right. You kind of got to go head on and just run through the process, especially if it's never been done before. There's no textbook for that.
Yeah, there's no qualification until someone does it the first time.
Right.
If you're qualified to do it, that means by definition, it's not very interesting.
Right. True.
Right.
Awesome. No, I love that. Last quick question. Based off the name of this podcast, what is your definition of extraordinary?
So my definition of extraordinary is a normal person who has outsized results. I think most people look at it the opposite way. They look for somebody who has phenomenal qualities and the capacity to do great things because of those qualities. But I much more like the normal person. And if you read my book, so it's not a memoir square. It's like all these studies of, pretty much average folks with no qualifications who ended up literally transforming or creating entirely new industries. And that to me is the extraordinary thing. It's these people who are willing to do something that hasn't been done before, even though the odds of failure are high. You're just, you leave the world of guarantees. You leave the world where, you're going to get some sort of checklist that's going to complete the task for you. And you enter this world where stuff doesn't work. And that would be my definition of extraordinary.
Awesome. That was fantastic. And last bit that I found funny too, that I just thought of when you said checklist, is the publisher that turned you down because you had a checklist. But
it was Collins' publisher. It was Jim Collins' publisher. I was so excited to talk to those guys because Good to Get Great was one of my favorite books. And this editor, she says, we won't publish your book because there are no checklists. And I was like, and then halfway into the conversation, I realized she hadn't even read the book.
Yeah.
Like, this is a lady whose job is to acquire business books, and she didn't even read it because she skimmed it and saw that there were no checklists. And I said to her, this was a funny conversation. I said, well, look, my book it addresses the topic of the unknown. So I don't even know how many items to put in the checklist. And she said, 5 to 7. I was like, what? She's like, oh yeah, 5 to 7. That's the number of bullets we want to see in a checklist. They have a formula. They have a formula for writing business books that involves a 5 to 7 bullet checklist.
Crazy.
Okay, fine. That was the end of that meeting.
Yeah. No, I've come across a lot of I've come across learning the publishing industry and how it's still being run as if it's 1900, and obviously times have changed, and somehow they don't want to make any change. But that story just reinforced it some more to me. And this book is essentially, it is no checklist. That's the whole premise of this. It's doing something that's never been done before. There's no plan. There's no map.
There's no plan. And there's a really dirty joke in there too. There's a joke. I don't know. You have to have a sort of puerile sense of humor to get it, but it slipped my editor, and I told him about it. And he was like, well, you have to tell me what it is. And I was like, no, actually, I don't. You have to read the book again and try to find it. And it's one of these things, you won't get it unless you have, I don't know. You have to kind of be puerile to get this thing. But it's a joke that I thought I was going to get in trouble for. And they let it go to publication. And, about it's about a 10%, a 1 out of 10 people who read it will call me and go, what? And I was like, yeah, it's in there. And they're like, how come? And so it's that sort of stuff, and we had fun with the footnotes, and I'm glad you caught the one on the exponent. That was one of my favorites.
Yeah, that was great. Well, Jim, thank you so much. This was amazing. Pleasure talking to you. I'll share the book some more. Is there anywhere I could send people to learn more about yourself, social following? Or
I'm not on social media particularly, but jimmckelvey.com has stuff that I think is important, some essays, links to, like, you can download a free copy of the book in its comic book form. And you know, that's where I am, because social media to me is not something I can use responsibly. It's sort of like cocaine. Like, I can't responsibly use cocaine, and I can't responsibly use social media. So I just,
they go hand in hand for a lot of people, unfortunately. So, well, this is great, Jim. Hope to stay in touch, and hope you have a great holiday with your family.
thanks, Owen. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Take care.